Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second day of C's undergraduate thesis symposium. It's called Space Beside Itself. And this is our fifth panel overall. Today is a short day. We have only two panels, but this evening we have the first of this semester's series of C conversations called The Bookmakers. And this evening's speaker, Sonal Mittal, is one of the respondents on this panel as well. And I never know if anyone is joining us through, online, and everyone here is a familiar face. But I just thought I'd introduce Kush and Sonal once again. So Kush Patel is the. These are just your titles, not your CVs as we usually do it. But Kush Patel is the head of studies for contemporary art practice, Master of Arts program, Shrishti Manipal University Institute of Art Design and Technology, and Sonal Mittal is the chair of Masters in Conservation and Regeneration program at the CEPT University. Thank you so much for being here. And the panel is titled Beyond Norms and Routines. And just to put it very briefly, it is the beyond actually that binds these works together. And it's a diverse panel. We have Maitri, Harsh, and Jaisha presenting in that order. And together the research is essentially pointing to a rereading of what we know about our cities, what we take for granted about our everyday spaces, who occupies it, how they occupy it, and all three of the research studies are told in the forms of, many stories anchored in everyday routines. So I'd like to ask Maitri to present her work. Her thesis is looking at how queer individuals claim space and assert themselves in the landscape of the city. What does the city afford them? What are their spaces? And, how does the individual queer the city and what is the relationship between them? Yeah, thanks.
Hello everyone, good morning. My name is Maitri and the title of my thesis is Queering City, Exploring Alternate Partialities and Solidarities. Finding our voice is the beginning of our politics is a line said by Arvind Naren and Gautam Bhan in the book Because I Have a Voice, Queer Politics in India. I have been thinking about the concept of queer spaces since my second year of architecture. Before I conducted any kind of research, my notions of queer spaces were those spaces, virtual or physical, where the queer self was acknowledged freely. I felt that digital platforms have become essential for queer people to connect, form solidarity, and build relationships. The privacy and anonymity these platforms provide allows users to have agency over their interactions using tools like Instagram's close friends list, close friends list or private accounts to filter who can access their posts and interactions. In addition to digital spaces, these queer social organizations also host in-person events such as parties often held in clubs, lounges, and other similar venues. However, these events are typically accessible only to those from upper class backgrounds as they are often held in exclusive venues that require financial resources. The queer individual, however, is not a singular identity. My curiosities about the life of, as well as the spaces of the area of the queer experience, brought me to my question: how do queer individuals claim the city, and in what way are these claims mobilized at an individual and collective level? I aim to investigate the varied ways in which queer selves claim the city and reading the city as queer space through everyday claims, negotiations, and solidarities. For my research, I am drawing on different conceptual terms, primarily from three sources, to shape the framework of my study. Perhaps the first question that emerged for the research was on how to anchor or define queer space. While there has been a lot written theory on the subject, my work launches primarily from the broader definitions introduced in Queering Architecture by Jay Cottrell, where I take the concept of queer spaces as fluid, adaptable, permanent, and visible. These spaces are not fixed or predetermined, but are shaped by the communities that occupy them and their practices. From Because I Have a Voice by Gautam Bhan, I adopt the idea of the intersectional narrative, emphasizing that each individual's identity is shaped by the intersection of caste, class, gender, and sexuality. From Soft City by Jonathan Raban, I take the idea of a softer imagination of the city, which challenges rigid boundaries and envisions urban spaces as flexible, adaptable, and dynamic. The queer experience is not a monolith and cannot be defined by a singular narrative. There is no particular place to look for queer selves So the study is situated across these varied individuals. These individuals are across intersections of caste, class, gender, and sexuality. The fieldwork involved closely following these three individuals as they went about their daily routines, examining their negotiations and claims within the city. The research methodology was based on semi structured interviews, participant observations, and documentation through photography and audio recordings. The routine of the individual becomes central to the study. It locates the everyday as produced through the politics, histories, and economics of individual lives. The everyday, through the routine, holds a mirror to the various intersections of these, through which the space of the individuals is understood through the following: negotiations, claims, and navigation. Asmita is a 28-year-old trans woman from a Koliwada in South Mumbai. I met Asmita at the Gacy Queer Made event where she was hosting the stall for Arvani Art Project. I spoke to her about her work with Arvani and later explained my thesis project and asked if she would be interested in talking to me about her routine and life. I was standing outside the entrance to her gully in the Koliwada and she came to pick me up. She came dressed in a purple nightie with three gold earrings dangling from each ear, a gold necklace, some red and ivory bangles, and her hair tied in an updo. The fieldwork coincided with the Ganpati and Navratri festivals, providing me with the opportunity to observe her in action as a religious figure in the Koliwada. I was able to follow her through these events, closely witnessing her routines and activities throughout the course of the fieldwork. The method I chose for Asmita's story is the map, which becomes a tool to travel and navigate her spaces. The map acts as a means of unfolding the layered experiences and the spaces she occupies. The neighborhood serves as an anchor, while the scale of the spaces she moves through shifts, depending on their significance. The space of the Koliwada accommodates the claims of Asmita, which she establishes primarily through her religious identity. During Ganpati, she takes up orders to tie the feta and dhoti on the idols. Anchoring herself in religious practices, she uses identity as a means of networking both socially and entrepreneurially within the Koliwada. The home is a central space that transforms into a shrine for Ekvira Ai, the local Koli goddess, where every Tuesday the home holds a larger aarti for the goddess. The upstairs becomes a more private space where she and her daughter, Chela, get dressed together. During Navratri, she becomes a priestess like figure for the community and becomes a vessel for the goddess to enter. The waterfront, temple, and guru's homes home emerge as important nodes within the Koliwada, acting as sites for building friendships and solidarities. Beyond the Koliwada, Asmita's claims extend into the larger city too. The network she builds opens up new work opportunities, such as draping the idols and performing at weddings and religious events. Her engagement with Arvani art projects opens up avenues for work which not only secures her livelihood but also helps her to subvert the dominant societal gaze. Through her participation in queer event spaces, Asmita engages with the larger queer communities, interacting with others who share similar experiences. Roy is a 42-year-old gay man from Thane whom I first met in an educational space. In the course, we explored how spaces have been queered and gendered throughout history and how these dynamics have evolved. He introduced himself as a queer historian, and not only his pride pins, but his manner and his ease with queer self immediately caught my attention. Beyond the classroom, he took us on a walk through central Mumbai to visit a temple led by a trans woman who was a priestess. During the time of the field work, Roy got elected as the head of the LGBTQI vertical for a political party, and I followed his day through his announcement and interviews, and how it trickled to other spaces and conversations during the movie screenings hosted in a nearby five-star hotel. I visited Roy often, following him while he went about his work, and have documented for the research for him in four distinct spaces, each influenced by the networks he navigates: work, friendships, and community. These networks collapse into one another, creating an overlapping sense that influences how Roy moves through his life. To represent this interconnectedness, I use the method of the scroll, where the space is presented as a series of continuous spaces. Roy's queer self is central to his identity, shaped by over 20 years of activism, which has shaped his networks, community, and friendship. Through these connections, he has entered the political sphere, advocating for queer lives within the framework of a political party. At home, Roy shares space with his younger brother John. They have created a ritual-like routine for themselves, where activities like doing laundry and having breakfast together become significant. Roy also frequents to various meetings and events organized by queer organizations. These organizations usually have a name that does not reveal its association with queer people. As a teacher, he claims space within academic institution by focusing on the history of gendered spaces in the city, exploring how queer people have historically asserted their presence. The class transforms when the blackboard gets used to divide the room to understand how the parda system works in Mughal harems. In political rallies and campaigns, Roy claims his space by wearing a pride flag on his back and using his platform to speak up for queer rights. He also draws on his extensive network of friends, many of whom are fellow activists, to support his work within the party. Niyati is a 22-year-old bisexual woman from the suburbs. I met her in college, and her colorful hair and jewelry immediately caught my attention. I approached her and complimented her strawberry earrings and how went it well with her green hair. We became friends. Coming from a conservative family and living in an apartment complex, Niyati isn't fully out as she is dependent on her family. The field work mainly consisted of following her through the event spaces and how the negotiations are graded and her queerness is asserted depending on the space, as well as observing how the digital medium allows for various kind of claims to happen. For Niyati's narrative, I employed the graphic novel format, which allows for transitions between different spaces. At one moment, allowing us to see her messages, at another, following her to an event. At once, seeing the space of the home as restrictive while also affording her access to privacy and intimacy through screen. It enables fluid navigation between these realms, easing in and out of varying contexts and claims. The digital medium becomes essential for Niyati, offering anonymity that enables her to express herself more freely. Through private social media channels, she connects with other queer individuals throughout the city and beyond. In the space of the home, where she is most closeted, it offers her much required refuge. Within the institution of the college, she makes partial claims to space, as seen in her use of studio corners and engaging in conversations with friends. The narrative gets structured around the announcement made by a queer organization about drag exploration. The space of the beach becomes a place of refuge in the city, offering the much sought after anonymity once again, but also opening up through this anonymity itself opportunities for intimacy and tender exchanges. On the way to the event, while being in the rickshaw, she helped her friend get ready by applying some liner and gloss on him, and she unbuttoned her shirt to reveal a black bralette underneath. The rickshaw driver is not bothered by the goings on his vehicle. The event featured stalls along the perimeter for exploring drag identity through makeup, clothing, and more. Drag artists were also present, sharing stories of their journeys. The main area was a space for dancing, uh, with the stage set up for drag performances, while outside, a smoking area allowed for mingling and meeting new people beyond one's friend group. The space is a joyful one, allowing her to be unreserved in the assertion of her queerness, taking comfort and pleasure in being around community. The city queered. Asmita, Roy, and Niyati each have a different way of claiming and negotiating space for their queer selves, whether through religious and entrepreneurial networks, political activism, or subtle negotiations of defiance, digital or physical. All of these acts are aimed at and also made possible through creating networks of solidarities and friendships, developing a community for themselves that challenges the heteronormative societal norms of conduct and locates their queer selves in it. The city becomes a site of friction and refuge simultaneously, where boundaries are blurred and traditional structures are deconstructed. The city queered invites a reading of the urban as one which is inventive, that lends itself to readings and occupation beyond the largely heteronormative norms that seem to construct it, and the one that not only accommodates or shelter but actively fosters and furthers the lives of those who do not fall within the mainstream definition of its citizens. These acts of claiming space by these other citizens reflect a broader process of queer individuals reimagining the city is a site of possibility, solidarity, and transgression. And here I am, a queer person claiming my space. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maitri. I'll invite Harsh to present his work. And Harsh is looking at the space of the toilet and the rituals of the toilet and the routines, and he's asking if there is an expanded definition that is possible. He's speaking, opening it up through lots of stories again and lots of routines. And his thesis title has, throughout this semester, provoked a lot of discussion, but I'm sure he'll be able to speak of it well.
Toilet is the space where the hidden interior of the body comes into intimate contact with the hidden interior of the building. Two plumbing systems temporarily connected. Is a statement in the essay Toilet Architecture by Mark Wigley and Beatrice Colomina. Toilets play a pivotal role in the daily life of the human with or without them noticing it. It allows for one to spend the most intimate time with the self, yet there is no conversation regarding the architecture of the toilet in the larger discourse, and hence my thesis is titled 6 feet by 4 feet, excreta and beyond. Coupled with this query is my medical condition that allows me to spend at least an hour in a day defecating, and thus changing the meaning of defecating for my family and me, allowing us to socialize on the rituals of the toilet. This led me to ask how have practices of rituals of hygiene produce kinds and configurations of the toilet in different housing types. The central objective of the thesis is to explore the expanded definitions of the toilet that go beyond the utilitarian as well as ritualistic ideas. Various readings by practitioners who have written on toilets, cleanliness, ideas of purity, pollution, codified laws on cleanliness, and code of conduct opened up various quintessential ideas important for the research. What is hygiene? The process of keeping oneself clean is called hygiene. And hygiene rituals are diverse and have their roots set up deep in ideas of purity and pollution apart from just prevention of disease. What does it mean to be clean? Mary Douglas in Purity and Danger speaks of being clean means being devoid of any kind of dirt. Dirt over here means bacteria as well as disorderliness of matter in a system. The dual idea swells up the concept of cleanliness to form linkages with sociality and civilization order, giving rise to a physical space to contain these hygiene rituals called the toilet. Now, what is a toilet? A toilet is not only a device for excreta, but a technology designed to sweep away visual, auditory, and olfactory evidence of human hygiene rituals. The ability to keep the sights, sounds, and noises of the toilet at bay is a wider denial of urine, feces, sweat, spit, mucus, semen, and vaginal juices. I asked 3 questions on the field that set up my framework. What are the associations with the toilet? What are their hygiene rituals? And what is the toilet? The thesis aims to demonstrate that rituals of hygiene and the toilet get governed by the association as well as the housing type. It is undertaken by studying 4 households in different housing types across the city of Mumbai. The first case is a slum type in Malad, Mumbai, where my interlocutor Rashi stays with her parents Sumati and Jignesh and her nani Jayaben. Jignesh wakes up at around 6 a.m., heats the water for bathing, and then brushes his teeth, followed by defecating. Around 6:30 a.m., Sumati wakes up, proceeds to brush, and uses the toilet, while Jignesh is having a bath parallelly. Around 7 a.m., Sumati prepares food, while Jayaben brushes her teeth, followed by excreting, and parallelly, Rashi has a quick bath, as she knows Jayaben will be waiting for her. A lot of times, Rashi stretches her legs, sits aimlessly for some time to feel relaxed. Jignesh and Sumati have their morning tea at 8 a.m. while Rashi is defecating and Jayaben, after bathing with her personal bucket, dresses up herself adjacent to the basin. Sumati, around 9:30 a.m. baths and then washes all the clothes of the previous day collected on the hook. At 11 a.m., Anaya, which is Rashi's niece, gets a bath from the house help while Jayaben gossips with her standing near the basin. Meanwhile, used vessels are all kept outside the mori. Around 3 p.m., Sumati returns from work, gets fresh, and washes the used vessels of the day. Around 4 p.m., Sumati stands on the door, interacting with her neighbor while the motor fills their tank with BMC water. Rashi senses this chaos as an opportunity and seeks retreat in the toilet while Jayaben sleeps peacefully. It is important that the toilet and the bathroom get segregated to accommodate the needs of the household, and the toilet forms a continuum to the space of the toilet. In doing so, it becomes an inseparable entity from the rest of the house, and it's expanded because of that. It also permeates negotiations of hygiene rituals among the family members, and in doing so, the toilet is completely woven into the fabric of the house. The second case is an apartment in Hiranandani Pavai, where my interlocutor Ayushi resides with her younger sister Aisha, parents Purvi and Akshay, and her nani Madhvi. It is a 3 BHK apartment with one common washroom and two washrooms attached to bedrooms. Ayushi and Purvi use the attached washroom, whereas Aisha and Akshay use the common washroom, and Madhvi uses the washroom of a room. And at 7:30 a.m., Akshay and Purvi use their respective bathrooms for their rituals, but Purvi doesn't have a bath in the morning itself. Parallelly, Madhvi, Aisha, and Ayushi are asleep in their rooms. Akshay follows his routine of defecating, brushing, bathing, and then leaves, whereas Purvi, when she baths around 10:30 a.m., makes sure to dry the floor after use. At 11 a.m., Ayushi and Madhvi both visit their respective toilets. Madhvi brushes her teeth, defecates, and uses a stool for bathing. She also keeps the bathroom latch open but closes her room's door. Ayushi, on the other hand, takes a speaker to play songs while brushing, scrolls Instagram while excreting, and vibes to music while having a bath. Before leaving, she makes sure to clean the floor dry as well as spray a room freshener. Ayushi appropriates the toilet to herself in various ways by visiting the toilet for retreat, doing her makeup, clicking and sending photos, and even self-pleasure. The spatial configuration and the number of toilets make the toilet from the core of the house, yet keeping it at bay from the household. This nature lends the toilet to be a very private space, which allows one to claim it more strongly and exercise their thoughts and intimate moments as one prepares to encounter their day in the toilet. The toilet holds together a pristine idea of cleanliness, which gets served via the clean and straight lines of the tiles, segregation of the dry and wet area, and a huge mirror. This makes the toilet an embodiment of class and gives the inhabitant a sense of identity. The third case is a BIT chawl in Sanders Road, Mumbai, where my interlocutor Samay resides with his mother Darshana and younger sister Nupur. They share a common toilet with 39 other coolies and have a private mori of theirs. Samay, around 8 a.m., wakes up, wears the toilet chappals, and picks the bucket from the outside of their coli and walks the corridor for defecating. The living room bedroom, used to accommodate his grandmother Savitri's hygiene rituals in her later stages of life. Darshana used to clean her diapers while sponging Savitri, their neighbor would also assist them. Samay walks down the corridor and sometimes calls his friend as well for visiting the toilet. Both of them walk together, gossiping about their lives. Samay waits in the line while gossiping with his friends and overhears all the political conversations that the people have while waiting to visit the toilet. In the toilet, Samay is at unease as he smells someone smoking a beedi, hears kids playing around, and even hears his neighbor watch cricket highlights. Samay, the moment he enters the toilet, carefully cleans it before using. When he is beside his friends, a lot of times either of them make sure to pour water on each other to have fun. And after defecating, Samay cautiously gets up without touching anywhere else. After reaching back home, he carefully washes his hands till elbow and legs and then only touches anywhere in the house. The corridor becomes a threshold between the kholi and the common toilets, which holds the community together. The ritual of defecating gets spilled to the corridor by the waiting queue and the toilet objects, affording interaction between the people. The logic of the common toilet is highly utilitarian, yet it reconfigures the association of the people to the ritual of defecating, and in doing so, very softly allows one to claim the cubicle to themselves in different ways. This case is of an apartment type of 1960 where the elderly couple relies. The elderly body finds the current toilet restrictive of some of their movements, hence they find the other parts of the house to accommodate their grooming rituals, and in the bathroom, both of them have specific ways of negotiating the space through exposed pipe, a stool, and leaning on the wall. The thesis concludes again by asking the same question with which it began and gains its answer from the field this time. What is a toilet? Toilet within the urban Indian household gets informed and layers by various factors such as type, ritualistic identities of the household, caste identity, their own individual identities of purity, aspiration of the class, and within that, there is also space for individual idiosyncrasy. Yet, it is the most standardized space in the architectural discourse. Historically, the toilet has been shaped not just by functional needs, but also by cultural considerations, making them more than containers of hygiene rituals. Yet, it is a default design space in architecture which gets governed by plumbing and drainage efficiencies. The prescriptive nature of the toilet, its form, its use, reflects a very idealized and standardized version of privacy and cleanliness, which, according to the field findings, contrasts with the lived realities across different households. In all these cases, the toilet constitutes a major chunk of the household or neighborhood, not by time, but by character and nature of association to that space. It mediates a space of retreat for an individual within a home, getting ready for the day, a space intertwined in the house, holding the aging body, a space for leisure, a space for care, a space where one finds pleasure, or even a space that percolates sociality within a neighborhood. This allows one to reimagine newer ways to afford privacy, newer ways of attributing dignity, and or even newer ways of affording socialities in the neighborhood. Hence, the thesis argues to expand on the idea of the toilet that gets designed in prescriptive and standardized ways and opens up in scrutiny many practices in and around the toilet and various forms in which the toilet lends itself to the household that goes beyond hygiene rituals and plumbing efficiencies. A larger question that I end and I ask is, can the architecture of the toilet be imagined to include the expanded definitions of the lived reality? Thank you.
Thank you, Harsh. I'd like to invite Jaisha to present her work. And Jaisha's work is looking at a reading of the city through the spaces and practices of inhabitants that are non-conformist in that they are non-productive, coming into contact with and obviously conflict with, the idea of the city designed for efficiencies, where even the idea of the body at leisure is thought of as a productive body, and you have malls and movie theaters and a host of spaces catering to them. What does it mean to be unproductive, and how does the city open up for you, really? So, thanks.
Hello, good morning, everyone. So, good morning, everyone. My thesis is titled In Praise of Idleness, City Affordances. So, cities, especially Mumbai, are hubs of productivity marked by efficiency, job opportunities, and a fast-paced work culture. Long working hours and high productivity define the city, but beneath this is a layer of non-productivity that includes leisure, idleness, and moments of doing nothing. As Ross highlights, this reflects a time-space model of work, contrasting leisure with work and activity with passivity. In Mumbai's bustling life, non productive spaces allow moments of rest, encouraging social relationships and enhancing transactional capacities. Non productivity is linked to leisure and idleness. Though related, leisure and idleness differ in meaning. Leisure involves relaxation and the freedom to spend time as one chooses, while idleness often means lacking specific activities. Non productive moments include casual conversations, observing others, using a phone, waiting, standing, resting, interacting, and sleeping. Non productive moments include this thesis explores idleness as a key way people use city spaces with small homes, resulting in making the city an extended living room. In an entrepreneurial economy, people often spend time moving between places. Photography here captures non productive activities, focusing on movement and body use of space. Street photography, inspired by the flaneur, captures the city's character and rhythm from an outsider's perspective. A triptych of three photos side by side expands the story, connecting the images into a larger narrative and adding depth rather than limiting it to a single frame. Cities blend efficient infrastructure with respite spaces, which emphasize non productivity and create diverse urban experiences. This leads to the research question: what is the speciality that affords the non productive dimension of the city? Streets serve as more than pathways, they are lively spaces that showcase a city's culture, hosting events, daily interactions, informal vendors, and providing refuge for the homeless. Selecting sites in Kalba Devi and Ville Parle reveal contrasting urban settings, each with unique layouts, users, and user groups. Karba Devi is a densely built commercial hub with narrow lanes shaped by traditional wholesale markets, while Ville Parle is a suburban area with residential zones, schools, and new infrastructure reflecting planned growth. These sites highlight how different streets promote distinct behavior, experiences, and community interactions within the city. This street integrates work and leisure with a cul-de-sac, walkways, and shops that open at different times. People gather naturally, creating a flexible urban environment. The drawings extend the image beyond the camera's frame, capturing what lies outside its view. This method of collaging the images and drawing over them is the idea of reproducing or recreating the captured image that exists, and then drawing is the understanding that develops of the one that is not captured. Writing on photos adds narrative, telling stories of bodies and urban spaces. The junction edges are occupied by workers like carpenters and plumbers as they wait, sit, observe, and idle until work arises. These spaces allow for non productive activity during free time, while shopfronts extending into sidewalks blur the boundaries between private and public realms. This street highlights various gathering spots formed by food stalls at different times of the day. The cul-de-sac and food stalls create spaces for workers and visitors to gather, while the closed shop fronts provide seating areas for workers during breaks between tasks. Activities spill over into this pedestrian street where cow caretakers and homeless people often gather. These shared spaces encourage social interaction due to their direct connection to the street, creating a dynamic blend of work and leisure. Vehicles fill the street while sidewalks and edges provide spaces for resting, eating, and idling. Shopfronts govern how the space is used. The temple and bus stop create a focal point on the street, serving as a gathering place and social hotspot. People use this space to pray, stand, idle, and interact, allowing the surrounding community to engage in non productive activities. These spaces beneath the tree are where workers park their handcarts and use the area for resting, sleeping, and socializing. The shaded area provides a cool atmosphere, creating an inviting space for people to relax and idle. The parapet on the right side creates a space for all user groups to spend their non productive time. It includes a cobbler shop, which serves as a socializing spot for people working in the area, offering seating. It becomes a place for idling between work. The street has few activities, making it quieter. Workers occupy shopfront spaces, spending time interacting. The footpath edges are used in contrasting ways by workers and visitors on either side of the road. The shade provided by the photo studio is used by people to stop, rest, and seek shelter from the rain. The street edges offer more spatial possibilities than just functionality. Workers use these spaces to spend their non productive time. The steps transform into seating areas that facilitate interactions between people, creating a variety of uses for the space. The residents transform the footpath into an extension of their home, turning it into a large living space. The area is occupied by people at different times of the day as a part of their routine. The junction here includes NMIMS College, Mithibai College, and Nehru Nagar on its opposite side. It experiences heavy traffic flow. The junction also serves as a gathering point with food stalls attracting people. It compares the sidewalk conditions of Mithibai College and Nehru Nagar, highlighting how the road edges are occupied with a railing restricting the space and limiting its use. The NMIMS footpath is narrow but vibrant with food stalls that encourage people to gather, interact, and eat through the compound, though the compound wall limits its openness. In contrast, the Mitibai footpath is wide but inactive, with a railing that creates a sense of separation and restricts its use. The sidewalk is used in ways not originally intended, as flower sellers sit there while vending, using it for non productive time. They risk fine if caught, highlighting a focus on development and planning that overlooks informal uses. The street features footpaths edged by compound walls, creating a sense of restriction. This division between private and public spaces isolates the built environment from the street, disrupting the connection and flow between them. To conclude the research analysis, there appear to be complex layers of interdependencies between built forms, street, and human behavior. Kalbadevi streets, free of compound walls, become lively spaces that blend work and non-work activities. These soft edges invite people to sit, idle, observe, rest, socialize, stand, and wait, transforming the street into a shared social space like a public living room. In contrast, where walls separate building from the street, this connection is lost, as the rigid walls lack niches or seating, creating a firm barrier restricting the allowance of holding non-productive activities. In Kalba Devi, the boundary between public and private is a thick, porous edge into the urban fabric. In contrast, rigid planning creates a sharp divides, as in Vilepale, where strict boundaries push private spaces into sidewalks, limiting public access and reducing community use. Newer planning lacks the integration of street and building activities, separating work from leisure. In Karva Devi, blurred edges create shared spaces that build social cohesion and reduce class divides, supporting non productive uses. Its work environment blends user groups with features like parapets and shop facades, encouraging non productive activities. In contrast, Vilepale's clear boundaries encourage privatization and rigid planning, reinforcing social divides and lacking spaces essential for non productive activities. This thesis argues that current urban development is eroding spatial and architectural elements essential to urban social life by supporting non productive activities. It highlights the built environment, streets, and social spaces as core to urban living. Critiquing the view of cities as purely productive, it advocates for designs that promote non productive activities which remain integral even without explicit support. Key to social reproduction theory is an understanding of the production of goods and services and the production of life are a part of one integrated process. It emphasizes that unpaid and informal activities sustaining social and economic life are often overlooked in urban planning. The thesis examines how spatial forms can integrate work and non work activities to create a socially cohesive, less polarized urban space. Using Mumbai's Vile Pale as a case study, it suggests that new development should avoid rigid separation between private and public spaces, favoring layered, flexible designs that support diverse social and economic activities. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jaisha. So, like we said before, it's a fairly diverse panel. We've had queer inhabitations of the city, and then the idea of the toilet opened up through routines, asking for an expanded definition, and Jaisha's work, which is looking at, spaces in the city for idleness and for the unproductive body. And there are a few things I think, that hold the panel together. And the first thing is, the idea of the beyond, which is asking for a rereading and a decentering. So, just to all of the work suggests that you re-examine spaces that you're familiar with and those that you take for granted, as well as through lenses and identities that are not the prevalent, dominant ones through which you typically, see and read space. And the other thing I think is that, all three of the works have dealt in a large way with the everyday in their research. And in Maitri, it's a very classical way to take on the everyday, and it's an essential framing for her, in order to make evident the lives of her interlocutors and look at how the politics of their identities intersect with their spaces. And for Jaisha, it's a larger framing where, the unproductive being takes on this significance because of their, it is through their perceived unproductiveness and the spaces that they claim that you're rereading the city and the city is getting softened and it yields to them. And it's also complicating the narrative of the city. And for Harsh, the idea of the routine, all of them have looked at routines very specifically and the everyday very specifically. And for him, it opens up how, the individual identity through its many coordinates of class and gender, etc., extends the idea of the toilet, and it's inviting, to read it beyond essential standardized ways for all of these inhabitation types. And while all of them deal with this whole facet of the everyday, their drawing strategies have, emerged as very different from each other. So you have Maitri, who has distinct strategies for each of her individuals because she follows them and the space reveals itself to her through their own inhabitations. You have Harsh, who begins, with the essential drawing of the type, which is the plan, and looks at how the toilet stories, when overlaid on the plan, just complicate what it is that you read about the plan and the relationship of all of its spaces. And Jaisha, whose sections are framing the street and very, detailing the urban form, and then also she layers it with her collages and with her annotations, and it's speaking of that complexity, and like it becomes a thick reading of the space of the city and of the street. So, those seem to hold all of them together while also look at how the idea of the everyday is dealt with for each of them and opens itself up into different kinds of readings told through their drawings. So thank you, all three of you. And I'd like to invite Sonal and Kush to respond.
So good morning. We are on day 2, and I think it's great. It's a great way to begin today, thinking about each of these different contexts, bodies, histories, and locations that you're bringing forth. I really enjoyed your presentations. I really enjoyed seeing the drawings, seeing your analysis, seeing yourselves in these projects. I think that really came through how you were located so intimately in these projects. Okay, where do I begin? I think first, in terms of observations, Maitri, I loved how you had these methods called the map, the scroll, the graphic novel, to begin to look at, represent, think about each of these lives. Whether there was a sense of folding in and out in the context of the map of a particular queer identity, whether it was a sense of rolling in and out in the context of a scroll, or whether it was the idea of the graphic novel, which is a page-by-page reading, disclosing, but also keeping things relatively private, depending on how comfortable one is with their queerness in public. So I think you navigate that sense of self across these 3 contexts very well. And I also appreciated you just taking on this idea, but also walking with each of these individuals as opposed to talking about them. So I think I want to sort of acknowledge that these are stories with each of these queer individuals and not stories about them. And so there's a whole shift in politics when that happens. Harish, I think brilliant way to look at what has been conventionally boxed out in architectural discourse. And you're looking at not public toilets. There's a lot of discourse in public toilets. You're looking at the space of relative privacy. And you navigate it across 4 different typologies, the slum, 2 kinds of apartment types, and then the chawl. And really think about what is usually seen as a relatively hard rectangular stall or a division in plan gets to be understood so much more intimately. And it's interesting how you start with your own reference to time, but then you conclude by saying your lessons are, or your understandings of the toilet are not defined by time, but through each of these cases, you're beginning to understand them in terms of character, nature, associations. I quite like how your thinking and reflecting with your own process. And Jaysha, yes, I think the idea of the non-productive, I think you invite us all into a conversation with you about what about the productive city gets to be contested, relooked at, reimagined. But then your sections are layered and they are large enough that they pull you in and you begin to sort of see how each of these thresholds begin to make sense. So I really appreciated this, the kind of the scaled diversity across these cases that you offer. Now for some questions. For Maitri, as much as you're careful in not reducing queerness to a singular experience or an identity, I want to push that question of queering the city even further and say, what is the specificity of queered renderings of the city? In the sense that, can you imagine in the life of each of these individuals, the map, the scroll, and the graphic novel unfolding? Currently, there is one individual and you've represented their life in the context of a map, the other individual in the context of the scroll, and the third individual in terms of the graphic novel. And you sort of do that because you begin to see their personal, private, public selves unfolding in different ways. But if queer selves are negotiating that sense of privacy, publicity on a day-to-day basis, what are the moments of the map, scroll, and graphic novel in my day-to-day, irrespective of whether I'm a trans woman, or whether I'm a gay man, or whether I'm a young individual who's still quote-unquote closeted. So what that would enable you to do is to hone in on the question of specificity even more. What I'm sort of inviting you to do is to really go deep into the question of queer specificity and begin to describe queerness through a set of self-descriptions, not coming out of much more generic descriptions and vocabularies, but coming out of the very specific rituals and how they begin to inflect and pose questions, hard questions of the city. So at no point are we then reducing the city that it's always going to be accommodative, that it's always going to be a space of negotiation, but we really pose hard questions of the city that when does the city fail us? Or when does it become impossible for us to even cultivate the kind of city that we wish? And then what are the kinds of pushings or pushing backs and the talking backs that happen in the name of and in the practice of queering the city? So I'm just inviting you to take the strengths that you have, and you have enormous sort of close observations and brilliant work, push it to the extent that keeps alive the radical promise of queerness. At the heart of it, if it has to be queering the city, there has to be a radical promise that keeps pushing back, talking back at the city, and not settle for the city to continuously be an elastic space. Maybe there's a moment where it completely snaps. And so I want you to start reflecting on that as well. In the context of toilets, Harsh, again, I'm deeply appreciative of the very, very specific and granular ways in which you literally have us all inhabit that 6x4 space. And now I'm asking you, what are the cultural critiques that are emerging? Because you've gone so specific, now I'm asking you to zoom out a little bit and say, now what are the cultural critiques emerging for you so that the 6x4 also gets to be challenged as a kind of the metrics of it also get to be challenged. Like, how did that 6x4 even come to be? So it's not just about what happens in that 6x4, but also the very making of that 6x4 that you begin to critique as an architectural convention. So I'm inviting you to zoom out a little bit and then say, what are the cultural critiques that your very close criticisms offer? And to Jaysha, I would like you to, so as much as I'm asking Maitri to be even more specific, Harsh to zoom out and begin to look at the cultural critiques, I want you to be somewhere in between and put the specificity and the cultural critiques in dialogue with each other a little more, so that the thresholds and the affordances stop being looked at thresholds and affordances, and there is something more that begins to look at the question of idleness. Who even gets to be, who gets to even idle in the city? Like if you were to just intersect it with gender, or if you were to intersect with class, then you would begin to sort of see that there are groups of people who have, there's a certain social acceptability to who gets to be idle in the city. And there's a certain ascription of value and value judgment of when that idleness becomes a social outcast. So what is it about, let's say, sex work and the city? What does it mean to really just loiter in the city? What does it mean to just be in the city based on who you are and not based on what the society expects you to do in that moment? So I'm just asking you to be a little more specific and start naming the subjectivities that emerge in those intersections. But overall, yeah, thanks for staying beyond, but keep that idea of the beyond alive. And keep pushing back at these ideas of norms and routines so that we build different ways of thinking with them as opposed to thinking about them. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Would all three of you like to respond to it first? Because I think they were very specific questions actually for all of you. Harsh, we'll start with you. Yeah.
So thank you, Kush, and I absolutely second what you said, that there are a lot of cultural considerations and cultural layers to the space of the toilet, which I did do research on while understanding the history of the toilets. And here I would moreover emphasis on the book Mary Douglas that she writes on Purity and Danger. And that book opens up a lot of these arguments of the space of the toilet, or rather than rituals of hygiene and the idea of cleanliness, which opens up and gets layered with the concept of dirt. And it also opens up how humans in civilization have this idea of creating a binary. So once a binary gets created, so humans then start to differentiate between dirt, and dirt becomes either order of matter for unity of experience, or it becomes disorder of matter. And within that, what she talks about in great depth and detail is she quotes these as primitive cultures. And as primitive cultures, they want their experience to be unified. And hence, there is a little bit of gap, or a very less gap left between holiness and cleanliness. But when you have Louis Pasteur discovering bacteria, there is a shift. There's a stark shift that takes in Europe. And that's when people start to realize that the idea of hygiene, the idea of cleanliness is beyond these purity or symbolic systems, as again Douglas quotes it. And then is when the picture of hygiene as bacteria and pathogen comes in. And it is in that time also what Mary Douglas speaks in her book is that people, to segregate order disorder, create very strong boundaries. And the skin is also one such boundary that people create. The word danger in her book essentially refers to as a transgressor of the boundary. So anything that lives between alive or dead, human, non-human, the two genders, or between this world and the other world, is called as a transgressor. Now, when the body becomes the skin, anything that comes out of the body or goes in the body becomes dangerous, and hence it gets equated to pollution. And this is where I feel that the toilet as a space for creating social order, people have, appropriated this space that links to this pollution related ideas, that once you go in you have to have a bath, or there are other lot of other rituals across cultures, across history that have sprung up. And today what happens is, with time, it is shifted into the home and become this very residual space, as it still today people carry the symbolic systems with them. It's not that the idea of pathogen is completely taken over and people are accepting, but it is also in those softer ideas that you want to remain clean irrespective. Cleanliness gets attributed to etiquettes today. If you are unclean or wear shabby clothes, decency is questioned. And hence, the idea of the toilet is much beyond, and it's extended beyond these boundaries. I mean, it doesn't remain in the boundary because cleanliness is essentially what is at stake here. So, I mean, that is the whole cultural layer that you were speaking of. I've understood till now. And here, the toilet, I think, today is at a place where architects need to now actively involve. Because when I read the article by Vigley and Columina, and they very prevalently speak about architects also being scared to enter this gray, because it involves a lot of sensitivity. Like there are a lot of cultural layers to this space and rituals of hygiene that need to be very softly uncovered. So as architects, I feel the cultural layers need to be considered, But the fact that it's a space, it has architecture, needs to be opened up for good amount of scrutiny as well.
Thank you for your comments. There are certainly questions that I would like to go further with beyond the scope of the thesis itself. Uh, so about queer spaces in the city, the as much as it is about space, it is also about the institutional aspect of it, like how the laws are shaping this, and because queer people right now are treated as second class citizens with not equal amount of rights as their heteronormative counterparts. So like in conversation with one of my with one of the teachers I had, where we were discussing the idea of the pride parade and how it has actively depoliticized over the years, like during the 2020 pride parade when people were uh, uh, also protesting about the CANRC. They were locked up, and there is an active depoliticization of these pride parades. And even now, when these events get hosted, they actively say not to carry any political messages beyond what you can ask for, like marriage equality or rights to adoption. So, these are some things that I want to build on.
I agree. And Harsh, thanks for thinking with that question. And I appreciate how you're thinking of the body in relationship to the toilet. So what I'm sort of hearing and appreciating and encouraging you to do is to continuously then theorize the body and what becomes of the body. When you look at the otherwise state typology of the toilet, and the idea of theorizing the body within architecture is really open for you to continuously do more work in. Matthew, there is this project, I don't know if you've come across, by Lucas La Rochelle called Queering the Map. And it's a brilliant digital storytelling project. You can go up to the website and it begins to tell you stories of around the world of how people have queered spaces, right? And Lucas La Rochelle comes to Montreal and begins to sort of look at what has been conventionally understood as a queer space, whether it is in the West, the bar or the library or the a designated cruising spot or a park, and how any space can be a queer space depending on the kind of memories that one is associating. And so I think it's just an invitation for us to then say, okay, when it comes to queering the city, what if the provocation was that the city is already queer? But what are the kind of impositions that make it impossible for us to then continuously enact that queerness? I'm just sort of inviting you to stay with your stories, the kind of active voicing of oneself, but then also instead of queering the city as if the city was not queer, start with that cities have always been queer. Now let's bring out what then becomes of those day-to-day possibilities, interventions, and talking backs. Yeah.
For your questions. So I would like to respond. So you asked me who gets to be idle in the city. So while I was doing my research, I used this method of a flanner. So a flanner is an ideal self who just roams in the city and then gets to know about the nuances of the city. So if you want to understand who these people, so I spoke to these people like who they are. So they responded like they were the workers who work in the the same area, and they are having their leisure time, their idle time in between work when they don't have work, like transportation work, any other work. So through that I got the idea of who these people are, and then talking about how is it to loiter in the city. So generally we look at cities as productive spaces, so we define it as efficient spaces. So I was reading In Praise of Idleness by Bertrand Russell. So he says like generally this idea of spaces or people being only meant for productivity is critiqued by him. So he says like the working classes generally tend generally tends to work a lot because there is this idea that the king has to live a leisure life and he earns more, and the working class and the lower classes tend to work more because they don't deserve being idle, and that's why because they don't know how to use idleness, so leisure. So because they are not educated. And then I was reading this the Knights of Labor by Jacques Rancière. So he talks about the labor class not being able to idle is because they have been forcefully put into this shell of working, because they are kind of uh, you know economically not in that position to get to do whatever they want to do. So even if they want to work as an artist, they cannot, because they have to fulfill their daily needs. So because of that also, this idea of idleness comes. And these spaces are just being ignored. We can see that everywhere, this particular idleness everywhere, but still we tend to ignore it because we just look at every place as being more and more efficient. So yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you so much. It was a very provocative, exciting beginning to the day. All three of the presentations are very powerful and um, asking the right questions, and also like very sensitively presented, and like the methods were also like deriving itself from the concern. And also like this is something that I'm very appreciating again in the second day, where I can see consistently that the students are putting themselves very much in the project and owning that project, and it's an extension of your own experiences. This is something which like legitimizes in a very powerful way um, the voice of the research. It's not somebody else's voice, but your voice, and then as an extension to that, the voice of the others. So I think that's actually a takeaway for me as well, and especially from this panel. So if we go one by one, so like we'll begin with Maitri, and amazing work. Like I also wanted to congratulate you in the sensitive and also a very playful representation of the individuals that you were working with. So for example, like, it's like the purple outfit is something, and it just stands out, but also at the same time, it is something that in your conversations it appeared that that is how they also wanted to um, assert themselves. So in some way, your abstraction of that and putting it into the representation is something which was very, very nice. Like, um, I also liked, I think in your Harsh and your Maitri, in your case, the omnipresence of the same body in the images, like they are doing this and they are also doing that and they are also doing this, is kind of like, so when you're saying the spatiality of an individual, it's fluid. It's not like, it's not confined, it's not static. And so how do you represent it? And you were able to do that very, very nicely in a way by showing the individuals in the same image several times. So that is something that I really enjoyed. And Harsh, in your case, like, um, yeah, I'll follow Kush's format. I really liked it. Like first is the comments and then the questions. So what I enjoyed in Harsh, your case also was uh, like you are talking about the private components of the toilet, but actually not so, because even within an individual house, it's also a shared space. And then it becomes a place because it's the people that you know, it's not really public, because we know those people, but then it becomes a place for negotiations. And then it's like maybe, people, like one person is inside and then they are chatting or overhearing and so on and so forth. So the space starts to extend beyond the walls, even though the notion of privacy is very much central to such spaces, but then it still tends to extend, like, and which is not drawable. because in architectural plans and sections and drawings, we have to draw the material that divides. But in this case, it blurs that division, and because the space is beyond that. And so I think your narrative that supported the drawings together was very well able to capture that thing. And I really like what stood out for me is one of your sentences in which you said that even if it is momentary, it's a claiming of the space, the claiming of the cubicle and doing things with their body as they would like resting, spreading, stretching their legs and so on and so forth. So like when these are moments of like claiming space and just being the intimate, and then, again, back to the routine. Really enjoyed listening to that. And Jaisha, your question of idleness, and also like, you're bringing to the core that, we do not pay attention that every individual requires moments of leisure, whether no matter what class they are at in the society, but it's not always, thought about. And some people, and I think it's again an extension of the arguments that we were holding in the conversation, that's the care panel, in which some people are always just caring and never cared for. And I think it's a similar kind of a thing, that the leisure is only, expected, that leisure is only assigned, as you said, to a certain class who are like quote unquote educated, and the others are not meant to be. So I think that sensitivity to this issue is commendable. Now, like coming back to you, Maitri, I was also very interested in this ing, the extension of the queering city. So ing of the queering. And so if, like I'll build up on Kush's comment that the city is always queer, it's just not, maybe visible, or it's not read that way. So when you say queering the city, and you are navigating the city along with your interviewers, I was very curious to know how would you um, um, like articulate the queering, because if it is already queer, then maybe what does the presence of a queer body does to a place. See, if we assume that a city is, any place is always queer, but the presence, it does something. Does it bring out the latent, does it reveal itself again, or so what does it do? And that is something that you might want to like articulate for yourself as you move forward, because I do think beyond just being it is very much about a body, and it's a political body as well. It's a political body. So when it is the politics of a presence in a certain place, and see, it is like, it is at some point the assertion of an individual in a place. Even like if I draw parallels from, leisure, and like also like what Shilpa Fatke and Shilpa Rana, they talk about that present, like the leisure, like occupying space and so on. It is about power, and and the person who is able to assert themselves in the place, like being very comfortable in a place, is an assertion of the body. And so what does it take to do that? And if I'm trying to like gather my thoughts, like so yes, so the political body, the political body, and where does then the labor lie in these cases? Because there is all the time, like the labor has to come from the person who are not close to power, but the city is not allowing for that. The labor lies with in certain cases maybe the queer body, in certain cases maybe the worker body and labor. So what is that labor? And so then it just becomes like, the project then starts to reveal the politics much more. And I think it also aligns with that question that the city sometimes like fails it, even no matter how much labor you put in it, it kind of just denies. So that question. Um, okay, Harsh, in your case, I was very taken by one of the anecdotes that you had in which this individual in the chawl, uh, that person cleans the toilet and then comes back and cleans themselves. So like it's connected to this question of purity and danger and the hygiene and the cleanliness and so on and so forth. Um, so how I get the anecdote, and I also get the criticality, like how it's getting informed by Mary Douglas's take on purity and danger. But I'm like, I would be very much interested in hearing how you articulate this act of an individual cleaning up, a semi-public kind of a toilet and then coming back and cleaning themselves in the house. So that navigation and that. So here it is, the toilet also becomes an extension of the individual house, and apart from overhearing conversations and so on and so forth. So how, just like, push yourself to like complete the train of thought, like, what does that mean for the cleanliness and the hygiene model when it is so political? How, and it has like cultural underpinnings as well, depending on who that person is and what are their cultural ideas of hygiene and cleanliness and why are they doing what they are doing. So I would be very much interested in hearing that. And just like because you are at some point wanting to like your project begins with like problematizing just a utilitarian definition of the toilet, but then it is extending into the ritualistic, but the ritualistic is always, informed by the cultural specificity of an individual. So just a thought that came to my mind, it may be relevant or not, but like culturally speaking also, um, uh, toilets were always like put at either like an outhouse in houses and or somewhere that they cannot be seen. And it was also because so two things happened because of that. One is like this idea of cleanliness, and also if it's not in your sight, you don't have to worry about it. And because it's dirty, and hence it has to be not in the sight. What it also does is that because it's out of sight, then it's not my job to clean it. So, and that is the politics, that is the problem, because, and that is where the dirt becomes that something which is, in need of its politicization. That, dirt has to be like, at some level dealt with in terms of like, and it is necessary. What Mary Douglas is saying, it is necessary, but it also needs like, engagement of a certain kind. And it cannot be that engagement that out of sight is out of mind. So I think if you are able to like, tie these threads, and especially that anecdote of that guy or, that individual in the chawl where they clean and they come back and then they clean. And I don't know, that anecdote was very powerful for me. And Jaisha, in your case, um, I think it's, so I was taken by the title, the non-productive, this, the non-productive spaces, and I was taken by the non aspect. Although in your presentation you do use the word like leisure and this, that, and the other, but the non-productive, I know it does two things. One, it brings our attention to the fact that it's in opposition to the productiveness, and it kind of challenges the productiveness. But also in that sense, it centers productiveness as like something which is necessary, or which is like desirable. So I would encourage you to like consider thinking other more politically relevant words, vocabulary, to define these spaces, or define these acts, even though it is like a momentary thing. So, and leisure may also be like a big umbrella thing. It's like, you know, it just tends to have, I don't know, I may be wrong, but in my mind, the word leisure tends to extend and prolong. But sometimes it's just like, you know, I remember had an opportunity to work for a correction center in Illinois, and so those guys, they had like a 2-minute break, and it was not a break. It was you go to the vending machine to buy a chewing gum, and so and then they would time, and so you go to buy the chewing gum. It takes a 30-second, but that's the break. And so these are also the tactics and so on and so forth. So forms of leisure are also, they can have a spectrum, and also forms of leisure can be very subversive. Because it's like, you know, in an office setting, if they say no Instagram, no Facebook, and so on. So what are the tactics is like, so the employees will do it on the phone. So there will always be those moments of subverting the productivity. And so I'd encourage you to look at a spectrum of leisureness, and maybe like, you know, not have an umbrella term, because that just like is, you know, because then you can work with times and like, and spatial. And again, that sitting on a ledge may be like for a prolonged period of time, but just like stepping out for a smoke is not. And it's like, you know, a little lesser time, and just going to get bathroom breaks is another way, you know. So the time of that that moment when you get away uh, will probably also enrich your reading of the spaces a little bit more. Thank you.
First, to answer or just reflect on your thoughts on the body. So I'll tell you something very interesting that I observed in the field, and that was the body of the elderly. The discussion that we were having yesterday, and I could very much resonate, because the body of the elderly and rituals of hygiene are somewhere that even it becomes complicated. Like in all the cases, or even at my home, when we see the elderly, their body is not able to adapt to the rigidity of the cubicle. And if you see, even in the Charles case, the bed becomes the place where everything happens, like defecating, urinating, diapers are changed, neighbors come into play. And then the toilet, in that sense, like the body of the elderly is, the toilet becomes very restrictive for that kind of a body. And even if you take different kinds of bodies, like for taking my example personally, till a very recent age, my parents used to assist me in the washroom, and that small space becomes difficult for even one or two bodies to coexist with enough amount of space required. It's very logistical. So in terms of body, the thesis also softly creeps into that idea, where it's very important to look at the body of the inhabitant as well. So on that, and Sonal, absolutely. While even I was reading about the history of cleanliness, hygiene, and you see the garderobe happening, you see those chamber pots and the London plague that gets caused because of people throwing their dump outside the window. And it's prevalent that I read also, and I understand that this kind of idea of the self, that once it's out of me, now it's not my responsibility, becomes or mobilizes a very centered idea where the individual, I feel, has to move past and think of the entire space as theirs, and then think of coexisting with everybody else's cleanliness as well, because it's to identify every other body is of the same type and excreting the same kind of fluids, might be different in amounts of quantity and types, but it still exists in the same fabric. And with that, for the case of the chawl specifically, as you said, and I thought, maybe the cleanliness happens because there is every day to the same space. He knows that either of the 8 cubicles he has to visit tomorrow, and that's why there is this cleanliness idea that, oh, let me wash it. But when you look for the outhouse, or maybe say open defecation, the individual knows that he is not going to visit the same place, and in that moment I feel that the self gets out when it knows that it's not going to be interactive with me. But in the case of the common toilet, which is not public, as you said, right, you know you're going to visit it tomorrow again, there is this conflict that, okay, you're going to go there tomorrow. And I feel that really plays a role in him, you know, cleaning it every day. Because when I asked him also, like, before cleaning, before and after, why do you clean both? It's like, after cleaning, so because I have to touch the toilet, that's why I'll clean. But before cleaning, he said very, very starkly that घिन आती है देख के कि किसी और ने भी इस्तेमाल किया होगा और मेरे हाथ लग जाएंगे तो. And that itself justifies the act that he does. But because he has to visit it again, he cleans it. And with this, it also establishes power and hierarchy in a system. Cleanliness, it's a very strong way. Like, even in all the cultures, if you see, the lower class, the lower caste are made to clean. So the idea of cleanliness is very undignified in the society today. Like, cleanliness needs to be put up to question, that because you're clean doesn't mean you are higher, or it's again like, you know, etiquettes. Like, if you are clean, you are higher. The statements like, he's clean, even when crime suspects are taken, we use the word he's clean. So the word clean here is getting politicized in a very strong way. Like, when we use it for crime and say he's clean, means, but cleanliness is not the word to be used there. So I guess it's in that complex relationship which there are, I'm falling short of words, falling short of research. And I mean, it's way too complex to, even I researched on 4 or 5 months, but it's very complex, and it left me 2 steps behind, shocked to see the amount of layering each of these words also have in them, and what effects it has left on the society and people today. Yeah.
Just, I don't know, maybe you are also looking into things, but have you looked at Ambedkar's work and on hygiene and sanitation, and his take on sanitation workers, and also Gandhi's, position? So I think these would be very much relevant for you to, like, see what have been the battles that have been fought, um, and are continued to be fought, when you talk about the sanitation workers and how it plays out on a day-to-day basis in places which are shared. Like, India is infested with class and caste politics, and it just like plays out on a day-to-day basis. So the sanitation, the expectation of all the cleanliness and all that is already embedded. So maybe those writings would help you in, articulating your project.
So, going back to Because I Have a Voice, by Gautam Bhan and Arvind Narayan, they also mention queerness as political and personal identity. Regarding the queering of it, what it means to say is that it is always in the process of doing that. It's always becoming, and it's always in the process of negotiating and renegotiating its space. So that is where the ing of the thing comes from. And through my research, like, this is just an observation, that like our ideas of queerness is very much through the Western notions of what it means to be queer. Like, in my friend circles, in these event spaces, there is a particular type of queerness that is uh, upheld or seen as valid forms of being queer. But through my research and through the last year of the courses that I've taken, it has opened up that, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, in the last courses, the uh, religion as an anchor to assert your queerness was something that was revealed to me. Like that, I did not think of that as possible, because the queerness comes with the assertion that you do not believe in religion. For majority of them, uh, that it's something that you separate yourself, and that very much comes from the Western notion and the social media uh, version of what it means to be queer. So this research and the courses throughout these colleges has been really helpful to open up the other aspect of being queer, which is uh,
Yeah, I just wanted to extend to what Harsh said. So, bodies of the inhabitants. So, the same space is being inhabited very differently by each body. So, in my case, also, all these streets that I went to, so I observed the entire street for one day, and through that day, I used to see the same space being occupied by a lady, being occupied by an elderly man, a small kid. It's very different because maybe the bodily language that they use is very different, and maybe it's because of the it's because maybe I won't be able to occupy the same space in the way they are occupying. So the same space caters to a very different kind of a speciality for these people. So it was very different, but in the case of Kalba Devi, it was clearly seen. But in the case of Vilepale, it was very different. Like the rigid planning, today's planning, depends more about talks more about the class segregation, and it talks about the compound walls that are being used. They don't think through these small nuances of the city that cater to these non-productive activities as well. So they kind of think about how the planning can look more precise, more accurate, more stark. So yeah, thank you.
It's a fascinating panel. I mean, uh, very well, I mean, very nice conversation. I was just kind of, wanted to take a slightly supra level in terms of space product and production of space. And the role of the body, the performance of body in the production of space and reconfiguring of its politics. No, I think that's something which is very powerfully kind of placed. Uh, I'm wondering, like whether is it that a, a case of extreme privacy in case of a toilet, or an extreme anonymity in case of a beach, or a extreme non-privacy privatized space in case of a street, that such performances can take place only? And do you need really the ladder of hygiene in your case, or religion in your case, or work in your case, to kind of make such performances happen? Whether is it in such, whether does it does I mean, do the performances work themselves out and repoliticize space in the living rooms, in the classrooms, in the whole series of spaces which are not uh, anonymous, which are non private? I mean, I'm not saying public, but in case of, so can it also kind of, does the performance of, or does it require anonymity and extreme privacy, or this kind of non-private, non-claimed space? Just thinking about it. I mean, you don't have to respond.
Yeah, I think just to kind of add to that, what is it very, I mean, this fascinating panel. And I think one way to look at this panel is also to not only think of each of your projects as objects of study, like the field, but also as a lens to see, how do you, like this, the historian Chansey said there are no queer spaces, but also spaces put to queer uses, right? Like, so how do we really kind of start rethinking the coordinates of thinking of cities or spaces through these lenses? Can they not be just spaces for queer individuals, or the space of the hygiene for the body, or this kind of idea of people who are non-productive in that sense, but really kind of rethinking the city from these lenses, which is then completely questioning the idea of the normative city itself. It's not the other then. It's not this is the standard and then that's the other, but the city itself starts getting completely reimagined through that. So I think I mean, this is a really interesting panel to come to kind of start making us question the way we look at our own spaces and our cities.
Norms and routines, right? Because then it's an invitation to critique the norms with which we build architecture. It's aptly titled Norms and Routines, but because through each of your studies, it's an invitation to begin to critique norms with which we build architecture, our cities, our spaces, but also ourselves, because we have all inherited those norms, and that has given identities and enactments to take form and shape. So yeah. Also, queer phenomenology, Sarah Ahmed's work would be absolutely fantastic.
No, I just wanted to, I mean, two things. Just one is to sort of differentiate between, non-productive and non-reproductive, right? And there is something sort of ties also the panel, which is, we think the question of non-reproductive sex, right? Which is sort of a taboo on, the idea of bodily waste, which is, in some sense non-reproductive, or the idea of time, which is non-reproductive. And that is also why these spaces don't have a space in that sense, right, in cities, right? And the second is that, is to be aware of uh, that these are, everything that is in some sense excessive is always being folded in, right? So leisure becomes a space for production in some sense. There are theaters and all of these things, right? Or marriage, right? Something that is, it's sort of folded into the system, or queer marriages or gay marriages folded into the system, so that, the idea of property and everything sort of becomes clearer, right? And that is why queering is such an important concept, rather than the idea of queer marriages in some sense, right? It's tied to question of rights, but it's also sort of becomes, right? So, those two things, something to be just aware of, like, I was wondering, I mean, just harsh, like, why the 6x4, right? In the sense of, that is something that you don't necessarily talk about, right? In the sense of, it can be private space or something that is about hygiene, but why the 6.4 in some sense? So, in that sense, the toilet also is that space, and it's just across religion and modern discourses, right? So there's this interesting guy, but I will, talk about how across Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, the question of bodily excess and, non-reproductive sex, everything sort of becomes a taboo, because, it has to be a productive system, which is also why the toilet becomes such a ignored. It also connected to the question of evolution, right? Like, from the monkey, which has his butt showing off, to something that sort of, evolves straight. So, those things. So, to be always aware of that, the difference between non-reproductive and non-productive, and So how do you not fold it in?
The nature of protest to get folded. The demand is to also get folded. That's a contradiction.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking also of like, when you spoke about, the city as being inherently clear and how Maitri's research, it starts off, she's talking about the act of queering, but then she also uses, this whole lens of the soft city to reveal the queerness of the city rather than look at it as something that's, being produced through their inhabitations, but rather through a revelation. And when you speak about the institutions that sort of govern your life, the most hardlined one is the space of the home, and you see that in the case of Niyati, the last person, and where when you have to ask those hard questions of the city, it's about like allowing these forms of inhabitation, but only as through mediated through her religious identity or her liminal identity or through certain kinds of access that you are granted because of your class, etc. So I think that could also be something that, where you see its inherent queerness and, yeah, look at what is tempering it or what is mediating it. Thank you. Thanks to everyone on this panel for, taking the specificities of your research and just pulling it onto this very political dimension. So I think we just about have time for a quick coffee, and we'll have our next panel at 11:30. 11:30. 15 minutes. Okay, thank you.